Place in Geneva, New York, a congregation centered in growth, wellness, healing, and the arts. My name is Cameron Miller, and I'm the pastor here. Lisa Gibson is the magician on the piano. This word video is part of a weekly trilogy you can find on YouTube, created to be an asset for your pandemic spiritual practice. To know we are worshiping with a community, especially in a time of separation, can be both healing and encouraging. Word includes biblical texts and a sermon that uses them for reflection on our lives today, both now in this time of pandemic and for when we get to the other side of this painful moment. Contemplative Restorative Prayer is a worship video created to enhance our prayers and contemplation, and it includes an agape meal that we call sacred. The third leg of our Trinity is a hymn sing, offered for joyful singing, but which does not take itself too seriously. Enjoy.
A reading from Deuteronomy. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Mount Pisgah, across from Jericho. From there the Lord showed him all the land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, and the lands of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the southern desert and the whole valley of Jericho, up to Zoar. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said to them, I will give this land to your descendants. I have let you look at it, Moses, but you will not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried Moses in the Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But even today no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak, and he was still strong. The Israelites cried for Moses for 30 days, staying in the plains of Moab until the time of sadness was over. Joshua, son of Nun, was then filled with wisdom, because Moses had put his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to Joshua, and they did what the Lord had commanded Moses. There has never been another prophet in Israel like Moses. The Lord knew Moses face to face and sent him to do signs and miracles in Egypt, to the king, to all his officers, and to the whole land of Egypt. Moses had great power, and he did great and wonderful things for all the Israelites to see.
When the Pharisees learned that the Sadducees could not argue with Jesus' answer to them, the Pharisees met together. One Pharisee, who was an expert on the law of Moses, asked Jesus this question to test him: "Teacher, which command in the law is the most important?" Jesus answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and most important command. And the second command is like the first: love your neighbor as you love yourself. All the law and the writings of the prophets depend on these two commands." When the Pharisees were together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" They answered, "The Christ is the son of David." Then Jesus said to them, "Then why did David call him Lord? David, speaking by the power of the Holy Spirit, said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit by me at my right side until I put your enemies under your control.' David calls the Christ Lord. So how can the Christ be his son?" None of the Pharisees could answer Jesus' question, and after that day, no one was brave enough to ask him any more questions.
Well, imagine we found each other at just the right time to share this moment together. Welcome to Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. My name is Cameron Miller, and of all the strange things, I'm going to tell a story first told in Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 12, and then continued somewhat, sort of, in Matthew 22, 34 through 46. Now, in a long forgotten, overgrown, unmarked grave, on a barren hillside overlooking a landscape of promises, there lies one of the most compelling, melancholy images in all of the Bible, perhaps in all of literature. Moses. Moses was orphaned by the arbitrary whims of state power, only to be adopted by Pharaoh, who ironically was the author of that original murderous chaos. Moses was then raised in Pharaoh's household to love the state and all things powerful and Egyptian. Then, ironically, disturbed deep inside by a genetic awakening, he suddenly perceives the suffering of his own people who are slaves to power and powerless slaves. Like God at the beginning of the Bible, who sees and hears and knows the suffering of the Hebrew slaves, a light switch of compassion is turned on inside Moses, and suddenly he sees and he hears and he knows suffering. And then, without thought, without planning, without understanding, he lashes out with fury, killing one of his own, an Egyptian taskmaster. No, not one of his own. But wait, his identity and his loyalty have flip-flopped. Like an American Taliban, Moses turns on those who raised him and who gave him everything, and murders an Egyptian officer that was only doing his duty to Pharaoh and the gods. So Moses must run. He must run for his life. He flees the long arm of Egyptian power, abandoning his soft, rich, affluent life, which is, to that point, the only thing he's ever known. Moses, fugitive from justice, man most wanted by the state, a turncoat, an ingrate. The Moses Odyssey goes on and on and on, twisting and turning corners we've long forgotten or may never really have known. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, so concludes the narrator of the book of Deuteronomy. No one before or since ever looked on the face of God and lived. Only Moses. Moses, from before the burning bush to the top of Mount Pisgah, was the one who God knew and who knew God. They walked arm in arm, hand in hand, argued and made up like quarreling lovers, and passed through fury together, bonded by bloody war. Then God let him die. On Mount Pisgah, God held Moses back from joy. Everybody else, all those whom Moses had led out of slavery would enter the promised land, but not Moses. God punished him. After all Moses did right, through the blood and the sweat and the tears, through arduous suffering and pain, through God's demands and the people's resistance, God's yeses and the people's no's, through all of that, the one thing that he did wrong becomes the period at the end of his life. And do you remember what that one thing was that Moses did wrong? It was something that you and I do every day, I'm pretty sure. something that probably every human being has done at least once a day during his or her life. And that is that Moses acted as if, perhaps even imagined in his own mind, that he was the master of his own destiny. Yep. In front of all the escaped slaves, Moses spoke as if he were the agent of delivery, as if the power he wielded was his power. That one time, Moses forgot who he was and whose he was. And instead, he imagines that he is a self-made man. He did what you and I do all the time. Act as if the man or the woman that we are is the person of our own making and that we are a power unto ourselves. And so, because of that one infraction, the Moses Odyssey ends in tragedy. Moses dies on Mount Pisgah, overlooking the promised land that he has been inching toward for 40 years. 40 years of deprivation. Everybody else will get there and enter without him. He will die on the mountain and be buried in obscurity. Unmarked grave. That was his punishment for a single count of hubris. I cannot shake the melancholy of that lonely, bony old Moses sitting atop Mount Pisgah, gazing wistfully down upon the promised land. Something about that image and God saying no instead of yes. After all Moses had done and endured, something about that stands in harsh contrast to the Jesus love lingo, don't you think? Now, I know that this is going to seem a lot like Harold and his Purple Crayon, which, by the way, is one of my very favorite books. But I want to think that the storytellers got it wrong. My self-interest screams for the storytellers to have gotten it wrong. If Moses gets left on Mount Pisgah because of the one act of hubris and rebellion, then my ending looks pretty dismal. How about yours? But that's the thing about storytelling. There's not only one story, nor is there even one version of each story. Written more than 400 years after the actual Moses would have lived, the Deuteronomist asks him or herself why Moses would be left behind and die. Why would this happen? He or she wonders. So then that ancient editor, the Deuteronomist, saw a morality play, a tragedy, in which Moses had to be punished in order for the moral drama to be reconciled at the end. But you know, you and I live in an age in which morality plays are pretty much history. It is difficult, if not impossible, for us to draw a straight line of cause and effect between moral and immoral behavior, between good and bad outcomes. I say that even though millions of people keep reaching for the crime and punishment scenario, otherwise known as the prosperity gospel, with its preachers making so much money, there must be some willing audience. But like I said, there's lots of storytellers. Still, for most of us, reason and data and experience testify against a morality play. And so the world no longer looks the same to us as it did to the Deuteronomists, I'm pretty sure. We live instead in an age of psychoanalyzing when we look inside for motivations, and in an age of biologizing in which we look inside for genetic explanations, and in an age of measurizing when we make our determinations based upon measurements and data. So I might tell this story a little slant, as the poet says. I can see Moses up there. Sitting all by himself on Mount Pisgah, feeling that he doesn't deserve to go on. He can't forgive himself. He can't really accept himself. He can't love himself. Surely, with a simple nod, any number of people who Moses pulled out of slavery and prodded through the wilderness would hoist his 120-year-old bony body on their shoulders and carry him into the land of milk and honey. All he would really need to do is make one little gesture, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people would come running. But instead, old Moses sits down to die. He just can't forgive himself. He just can't hold the affirmation given him by the people who loved him so much. He cannot say yes to love, and so he says no to life. Yep. That's how I would tell the story. It would not be with a God who was so stingy with forgiveness, but with a Moses who took so many to the promised land, but he couldn't take himself there. Of course, that's projection, plain and simple. Such a story tells the struggles I have, and also many people who I've known well, which takes us to Jesus' wisdom. The sparseness of Jesus' words and the seeming simplicity of his summary belies the deep complexity of that wisdom. Jesus' summary of Torah is a jelly holding dozens, if not hundreds, of gnarly interconnected questions. One leads into another without ever really answering the first. Is it possible to love God or to love a neighbor or anybody else if we have not accepted our own lovability? If we've not done the work of our own self-acceptance, and we've not entered into the wounds and injuries that bark judgments and condemnations inside of us, can we truly love someone else? Can we truly love God? Now, I don't actually know the answer to that question, by the way. I assume there is a deep and pervasive connection between self-acceptance and our capacity to love well, but I don't know for sure. Perhaps there is no single answer, and instead endless questions to lead us through the wilderness toward the promised land. But just like you, I'm the storyteller, so I get to edit the narrative. In my version, the way I understand it, loving God and loving one another begins with believing, no, not so much believing, but accepting deep down in my bones that God loves even me. And those 28 little words that Jesus weaves together, he summarizes the 800,000 words that fill the Bible. Yes, I looked up how many words in the Bible. Jesus' spare synopsis of ageless wisdom is like a painting that you can look at for hours, gazing first at the image as a whole, and then allowing yourself to descend into the complexity of the detail until finally becoming completely absorbed within the confines of its frame. To love God, to love neighbor, to love self somehow are connected with a thin filament of spider's silk stronger than blood. I think it's like a Zen koan that leads the open mind to bliss rather than a satisfactory answer. Somehow, some way, My acceptance of my own lovability is inextricably connected and dependent upon my loving you. And loving God, I don't get to know with the same intimacy that Moses did. It's a very strange religion we have, but it's very much worth climbing into the story and continuing to tell it. Well, thank you for being part of this today, connected in ways we don't even see. I appreciate you being part of this community and this worship today, and hope that the experience will in some way contribute to your growth and your healing and your wellness. And with all that, I wish you the peace of God. Thank you.